Waiting for a big moment in this process as Vice President Harris is about to give her concession speech. We'll take you there live as soon as it gets underway. Obviously, thousands of people have gathered out there to hear that. And meanwhile, President-elect Trump still faces legal battles as he gets ready to head back to the White House. Former Attorney General Barr telling Fox Digital, quote, "The American people have rendered their verdict on President Trump and decisively chosen him to lead the country for the next 4 years. They did that with full knowledge of the claims against him by prosecutors around the country. And I think Attorney General Garland and the state prosecutors should respect the people's decision and dismiss the cases against President Trump now." And Bill Barr joins us now. Attorney General Barr, always good to have you with us. You know, we have heard a little bit today from Letitia James, who appears dogged in her pursuit of bringing some sort of justice to former President Trump and the next president of the United States. How do you think this is going to play out with her and with Jack Smith and with President Biden?
I don't think the president really is going to have any legal problems going forward. These cases are not going to go forward, neither the federal cases nor the state cases against the president. So I think it's really a question of how these governments, the federal government, the Justice Department, is going to dismount from the limb it's gotten itself out on. I think all cases are a matter of discretion. There's no rule that says just because you can make a case or think you can make a case or put a case together, you have to pursue it. It's always a question of what's in the best interest of the country. And in these situations, there's no doubt in my mind that the best interests of the country are served by them dismissing the case. They're not going to be able to go forward with it while he's a sitting president, either the federal cases or the state cases, because we don't want these kinds of things distracting the chief executive from dealing with the people's business. And the cases are very weak cases. After they were brought, there were a number of appeals court decisions and Supreme Court decisions that essentially shot at their cases full of Swiss cheese. And they're not compelling cases, and trying to pursue them after the president leaves office would involve years and years of arcane litigation over legal doctrines, because these cases are not meat and potato criminal cases. They're very novel cases. They raise all kinds of constitutional issues. And at the end of the day, the juice is not worth the squeeze as far as the public interest is concerned.
Attorney General Barr, this is Brett Baer. Thanks for being on. You know, to your point, the appellate court, I listened to that argument on the Letitia James case, the business fraud case, and it seemed like they were very skeptical, to the point where it seemed like they may even throw it out or really diminish what it's going to be, the final settlement. If that's the case and it happens, what's your sense about how this was used in this campaign by the other side, despite the fact that they lost?
Well, right. Now that case, Letitia James's case, is a civil case about things that happened before he was president. I said at the time I thought it was an abomination and crazy and would never have been brought, in my opinion, against anyone other than President Trump. And I felt that it was brought for political reasons. But it backfired spectacularly on the people who have been trying to use lawfare to weaken their political opponents and score points in the political arena. And those cases, that civil case, but certainly the criminal cases, the cases in New York about the so-called payoff of hush money, and which did relate in part to things that happened when he was president, and the case in Georgia, and the two federal cases backfired, and ended up actually giving President Trump a lot of strength. And I think a lot of the vote that we see today, the vote levels we see today, people are tired of this nonsense. Tired of seeing the legal system used like this.
We saw every indictment, his poll numbers went up. And now we see what happened in this election yesterday. So it's a comeuppance of sorts for some of these efforts. Bill Barr, Attorney General, thank you very much. Always good to see you.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.